All right, today we're going to read from Genesis chapter 1. Not the original, we're going to do the King Namor version. I suppose we should do a little introduction and explain what's going on. This is probably one of the most misunderstood, most believed, and least read books in history. And a lot of people take it as the Word of God, and I think if we read it and understand it, we'll understand that's not true. And so it's our objective to understand what we're talking about, and that's why we're going to deal with this Torah in the most we're going to take it apart piece by piece so that we know what's going on. Okay, anyway, we'll start with today's reading, chapter 1, verse 1. When God began to create heaven and earth. Okay? Now who the hell is this God fellow, and what possessed him to embark on such an endeavor, blowing a wind through the void, over the water in the void? And the first thing he does is turn on the light with his saying, "Let there be light." That was cool. So he had light and darkness and called it a day, the first one. The next day he separated water from water. The water above he called sky, and that wrapped up the second day. The next day, God put the water in one area so he'd have some dry land. That he called earth. The gathering of water he called seas. He was happy with that and covered it all with plants and trees with fruit that had seeds. He liked that, and the third day was done. God wanted light in the sky and to make set times, days and years. So he made two lights, a bright one for day and a not so bright one for night. And he threw in some stars for the night. He thought that was cool. That was day 4. God got really creative and added, in verse 20, swarms of living creatures, and birds, great sea monsters. A couple things must be mentioned before we go on. To start, God is likely insane. An eternity of being alone in a void, and he whips up a universe in 6 days. And verse 27, he created them, male and female. Be fertile, rule over everything. Everything for the man, male and female. God was really impressed with himself and the things he did, especially the man creatures. Well, we'll see. Sometimes these all-in-one starter kits aren't all they claim to be. Okay, we have to point out a few things. Okay, first of all, just because the thing is written and it states that God did a thing does not mean that there is a God, and even if there was a God, it doesn't mean that he did the things that sit in the book. We all know these days, even those Muslim folks like to think, there's no S on folk, they like to think that their book was written directly told by Gabriel that God told him. And I mean, where are we getting these mad ideas? In 1,000 years, somebody's going to say, well, God told, Samuel Clemens to write, I get them all mixed up now. Anyway, we're thinking of Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is a fairy tale, like this book is a fairy tale. And in 1,000 years, 2,000 years, if Alice in Wonderland is the only book, there's been some kind of devastation. Perhaps there's been another ice age, and the only book that survived was Alice in Wonderland. And people would read the book and think, this is how the world was created. And out of that, you would get your insanity like you have your insanity now. When the book was first written, no one knew anything about anything. There was probably a literacy rate of less than 0.1%, and those were mostly priests. All the information that was held through any kind of literature was done by hand, and it was the monks that were always doing the writing. And most of all the writing was held by the priests up until about 500 years ago, when the Catholics started printing out forgiveness for $1.50 or whatever they were charging back then. But that whole idea about learning how to read, that's a new thing for us. So this book has taken on too much importance because it was one of the few books. But the story about this God guy creating the universe is also not new. And a lot of it comes from speculation. People looked up into the stars and they tried to figure out, why are we here? What are we doing here? Well, Nobody knows that, and perhaps it's not necessary to know. But back then, it wasn't necessary to think, okay, we are the center of the universe. The Earth is flat. Back then it was flat, and there was water above and water below. But it's not the way it is. It's the universe, our universe, there's probably countless universes, started not in a 6-day creation thing. It started 14 billion years ago. Now when people say, well, it was created 6,000 years ago, they usually forget to figure out how that's going to work with dinosaur bones and stars that are all over the universe. And the universe is evidently, you can look at it, and people have looked at it, and measured the movement of the stars, which are all sort of flying in every direction at light speed. It's about 14 billion years from the start of the universe. The first half a billion years, there was nothing. There was amazing amounts of energy, light energy, very hot, and then space was created or made or became, and then there was atoms, and from the first atoms, stars were formed, and exploding stars and cooking up stars made more atoms, and all these things took a long time, and it wasn't until about 8 billion years ago that our sun came to be, and our Earth is to stardust. It's whipped up stuff out of the sun or other stars, cooked up to really hot temperatures, and then out here in space, it cooled down a bit. And then eventually there's life. But all these things we're just figuring out now. And back then, they just didn't know anything. They didn't know that the Earth was old. And so they speculate on how it is. And they think, well, God must have did it. If God is like a euphemism for hell if I know. So you say, well, God did it. And let's just take one more thing out here. God created day and night and made a sun for the day and the moon for the night. Well, that's not even true. The moon will be there at full moon, but a new moon, you can't even see the bloody thing. And what was the point? Okay, there were no days at the start of the universe. At the start of the universe, things didn't happen in days. It happened in astronomical time frames. Everything took billions and billions of years. This whole concept of day didn't happen until the Earth started spinning round and round, and that was only about 4.5 billion years ago. So we got 10 billion years without an Earth. So the first 10 billion years, there wasn't even such thing as a day. A day is a measurement from human being point of view of how long it takes for the Earth to rotate. So the whole concept of saying that the first day, there was no first day. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? The rooster. No, that didn't fit. Well, anyway, that's enough for this one. We'll get on to chapter 2 soon.